Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through His infinite mercy, His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, His child and forever I am. His child and forever I am.
The Church of Christ in Canada welcomes you to Key to the Kingdom. Today's lesson is entitled Pharaoh's Dreams.
Thank you for joining us today as we continue a look at God's unfolding plan for the redemption of mankind. What a joy it is to know that we can have salvation through Jesus Christ. And isn't it also phenomenal to think that this was the fulfillment of a plan of God that took centuries to bring into place? That God loved us and cared for us, made those arrangements for us, and that history unfolded as God wanted it to, as different events took place, different people came and went, but that would eventually come to the point when the time had fully come. Jesus came to become that Savior who would take away our sins. You know, sometimes I've had people say to me, if God really loved us, why did He go through all this? Why didn't He just have Jesus die at the very beginning and say, okay, this is how you're going to be saved? and I guess in a way, that probably makes some sense, I suppose. The idea that God certainly could have done that. He could have had Jesus die and raise Him from the dead, as He did at the time He did. He could have done that in the very beginning. And yet, I really believe that part of God's plan in the unveiling of His final redemptive power through Jesus, that part of that had to do with educating us, educating mankind, to recognize something about God, to recognize that God is a lover of man, that He is willing to save us, but He demands of us our respect and our obedience. Paul reminds us that the things written aforetime, talking about the Old Testament, were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. The idea that these things that took place back there kind of helped us and grounded us so that when in fact the time was right, Jesus did come and the price was paid. Well, be that as it may, let's go back to where we were last week. We were talking about Joseph, because he's such an important figure in the unfolding of God's plan. And we had him in prison as a result of the lie of Potiphar's wife. And we have him, last week we talked about his interpretation of the dream of the butler, the cupbearer of Pharaoh, who had been put in jail. And he had this dream, and when the dream was interpreted, Joseph was able to give him good news. He said, you're going to, in 3 days, you're going to be restored to your position with the king. That's good news, all right? Well, if we go back, we're in Genesis chapter 40. If we go back to Genesis chapter 40, look at verse 16. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. Now, you can go with this guy, right? I mean, here's these two fellows. One was the king's butler, the other was his baker. They're in jail together. We don't know why they're in jail. We don't know exactly what the circumstances were that put them there. But they're there. Both there together, both servants of the king. The first one, he has a dream. He gets a good interpretation. So the second one, seeing that, says, okay, interpret my dream. I want to hear that. Okay, so let's go back to the reading. He says, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. Not such a good conclusion, not such a good dream, not the end result he would like to have had. And yet again, we've talked about dreams, talked about Joseph being a dreamer, and now his interpretation of dreams. But at this point in the text, we come to a statement that to me has always been, like when I've read it, I've thought, how sad it is. I go back to chapter 40, verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Now remember, if you remember when Joseph interpreted this guy's dream, gave him the good news, you're going to go back to the king, Joseph said, you remember me. You remember me when you're back before the king. But he didn't. Pretty human, right? Kind of a human type guy. I mean, so many times it's easy to be excited and thankful and all that about something and then forget. Wouldn't have taken much for him to have shared information about Joseph. But when I read that and I hear that and I think, yeah, that's sad. On the other hand, I think perhaps it was just a matter that the time wasn't right. You remember Joseph's a young man. He's gone through terrible things, more than I would ever want to think about going through. To have on the one hand, the love of his father who loved him more than he did the other boys, giving him this beautiful coat to express that love and all that. To have these dreams that he had about how his brothers would bow to him. Not only that, even his parents would bow to him. And then he gets sold by his brothers. By his brothers. They sell him into slavery. And yet he maintains his integrity all the time. He maintains his relationship with God. In fact, when Pharaoh's wife tried to entice him into the bedroom, his response was, I can't sin against God by doing this. And so he certainly has his view set properly as he recognizes the power of God in his life. Well, if that's where the story of Joseph, the story of the patriarchs for that matter, since Joseph is an extension of the stories that we've talked about of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, if the story ends there, pretty sad deal. But thankfully it doesn't end there. If we go back to chapter 41 of Genesis, beginning at verse 1, It says, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. Well, I kind of think about that. I mean, that's a real phenomenon, it seems to me. I've never seen or understood a cow wanting to eat another cow. But that's what happens here. And he wakes up. Well, go back, verse 5, he fell asleep again. And he had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing in a single stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. So here he's seen these dreams. He doesn't know what they mean. Pharaoh remembered the dreams. He knew what they were. He just didn't know the meaning. He didn't understand. It didn't really make good sense to him. And so, verse 8, in the morning, his mind was troubled. So he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Okay? He needs somebody to interpret it. He calls these individuals who are supposed to be in this business. These are the guys who are supposed to be able to give you the answers. These are the guys who are supposed to be able to tell you what it means, the dreams that you've had. But that doesn't work out that way. Well, thankfully, the chief cupbearer remembers. Let's go back to verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings." Only took 2 years. It only took him 2 years. That's pretty bad shortcoming, all right. But anyway, he remembers. So verse 10, Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged. So he remembers. Pharaoh's had a dream. He can't figure it out. His magicians can't figure it out. He wants to know what it means. Thankfully, this fellow remembers Joseph. And so, we're told that Pharaoh sent for Joseph immediately and wants him to interpret his dream. Again, let's go down to verse 13. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh. "But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Again, are there passages sometimes you read in Scripture and you wonder, okay, what wasn't recorded there? What might have been said? This Pharaoh, he's got all the power in the world. And he wants this dream done, wants Joseph to do it. He's got testimony that Joseph is able to interpret dreams. But the answer that Joseph gives is, I can't do it. I can't give you the answer. But God can. But God can. Again, that testimony, that commitment to God, that realization that it is God who's in control. Even in this foreign land, even all of these many miles away from his family, God is still in control. That's what Joseph is saying. So, verse 17, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile when out of the river came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they gazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dreams, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing in the single stalk. After them, 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me. So he retells the story of his dreams. But he doesn't still know what the meaning of them is, and is looking to Joseph to help him out. And in many ways, this is really the major central point of all that Joseph has gone through up to this time. The fact that he's going to have the opportunity to interpret the dream of Pharaoh. The fact that he's going to be able to give Pharaoh the warning that he needs about the future is going to put him in a position where he can serve God in a very powerful and effective way, and can help along the plan of God for the redemption of man. Well, just quickly, let's see what the interpretation was. Verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. About 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because of the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. Well, that's kind of interesting, the fact that there's 2 dreams, and this just verifies and underlines the fact that the dreams are true and that the interpretation is true. And so Joseph gives Pharaoh a little advice. in verse 33, "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." It's interesting that here Joseph, not only gives the dream, at least interprets the dream, but then he tells Pharaoh, you need to do something about this, and this is what you need to do. You need to appoint somebody who can oversee this and make it happen. And amazing. Pharaoh said, "You're the man. I'll let you do that. You'll become the guy who does that." And so they prepared for the famine. They had plenty of food. In fact, they had so much food that they were able to share with other people. And in the by and by, when they are distributing the food to people, who shows up but Joseph's brothers? And the last person on earth that the brothers of Joseph expected to see was Joseph. And I guess with him, dressed up and so forth, the way he would be at that point as in the position that he had, when they do come into his presence, they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And if you were going back to the old melodrama days, when the guy would be rolling his fingers and thumbs and thinking, what I'm going to do to get back at these guys who have done to me. Well, Joseph's not that way, of course. And even though, as it happens later on, when Joseph does, in fact, make himself known to his brothers and lets them know who he is, they are frightened. But Joseph said, don't worry. Don't worry. What you did for evil. And, what else could you say? I mean, they wanted him to suffer, no doubt about that. But he said God meant it for good. The fact that Joseph was there, the fact that God gave him the ability to interpret the dreams, the fact that Pharaoh or the king had given him the position of power that he had in the nation, made it possible for the next phase of God's plan to take place. And that involved the gathering of all of Jacob's family down into Egypt in a very nice part of the land known as the land of Goshen. Now, this becomes very important in the fulfillment of the plan. Back early on, we learned that the time was going to come when the people of God would be in bondage. That was the promise that was made back to Abraham, the statement that was made. The time would come when they would spend this time in bondage. And so that had to happen. They had to have this time of bondage. And that's what's getting ready to happen. Oh, not for a long time. It's not going to happen immediately. They're going to move into Egypt. They're going to have, they're going to be treated like royalty. Because after all, Joseph, their brother, he's the guy who saved the king's bacon by arranging for this time of good and famine, and to make it possible to provide for the people, not only the people of Egypt, but even for neighboring peoples around who came, who needed food. who needed what they didn't have because of the years of famine they were experiencing. And so we have a very beautiful kind of time happening when we have the people coming to live and enjoy the days ahead. Next week, we're going to move on in our study to see the next major happening, which really is a precursor of the final plan of God. And that is the provisions that were made eventually for the law of Moses, the law that was given by God to Moses to be given to the people of God to serve Him and to honor Him. Join us again next week as we continue to look at God's plan for the salvation of man through His Son Jesus, as we look at the opening events through the Old Testament. May God bless you in your study this week of His Word.
The way to life is the way to friendship, purpose, and fulfillment. The intro lesson of our Bible study is entitled, The Way to Life. This particular booklet gives an introduction to our Bible study that is free for the asking. Simply contact us and we'll send it out to you. The first lesson gives an overview of the coming study and has a number of questions to be answered and returned to your study helper. Following that, you will receive 6 booklets entitled God Has Spoken is the first one. This is Good News is the second. Number 3 is Knowing Jesus. Number 4, Born of Water and Spirit. Number 5 is The Family of God. And number 6, Live a Life of Love. Call us at 1-800-795-3522 or send us a note on our website at www.keytothekingdom.ca.
Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through His infinite mercy, His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, His child and forever I am. His child and forever